Today, I want to welcome Dan Beaudry to our podcast episode. I've known Dan for about, I want to say, a year and a half, 2 years or so. And I know he's been sort of a pioneer in the LDP learning and development sort of world, early talent development world. And he's also a founder of this really interesting organization that I'll let him introduce you guys to. Dan, why don't you take a few seconds to do a self introduction for our listeners today?
Sure. So I run an organization that's essentially the professional association for people that are developing early talent hires. So not so much the recruitment side, although we do some of that,
Yep.
but the people in my professional association are laser focused on running these structured programs that develop early talent hires into something that they're ready for after the program. And the organization started in 2012. I used to run a program like this at monster.com a long time ago. It was a lonely existence. You're always trying to find other people out there who understand you. And I had a hard time finding other people at other organizations who did what I did. And so the event started in 2012, and people started to come together each year who were in this space. And then from then, we've just grown the organization into something more substantial. So now we have a membership model. We conduct research. We have a calendar of calls. We just get people connected so they can help each other out and answer the questions that we're all working on together regarding early talent development.
Great, great. And my next question, you sort of answered it, but I'm sure there's other motivations for why you started this, other than it being a very lonely space. But can you walk us through that journey? Like, what got you thinking about this organization? And honestly, Dan, I attended this and we sponsored this event a couple of years ago. I was thrilled to meet participants from all sort of types of industries and levels of what we call early career development. So I had a fascinating time. I had a great time, great network of individuals that I still keep in touch with, to be very honest. So t tell us your motivation for starting
Yeah,
LD.
I'm glad to hear that you had a good experience there. I mean, I'm under no illusion that people come together in this organization because of each other, not so much because of me or anything that we do. They're really there to connect with other people and to figure out how have you addressed this particular problem, or geez, isn't this really hard? Yes, it is, and then we all feel better because we have company, right? But originally, what motivated me with this organization is I've always wanted to start my own thing. That's always been something that I want to do. I know a lot of people have that urge. And I've known this space very well. I come out of career services, I come out of campus recruitment. As I said, I used to run a program like this. So, as often happens in life, you see an intersection of interests and opportunity, and that's really what started this. And I can tell you, it's been really rewarding because um, it's not easy for people to find other people out there who do what they do in this space because it's such a niche. And so just to see people come together and have the experience that you just mentioned, come together and kind of bond over a problem that they thought they uniquely had, but learned that they didn't, and then walk away with some really actionable, ways to address the problem that they're having. It's rewarding and continuously motivating.
One of the, I think, cool parts of what you do with your organization is this crowdsourcing of data, right? You do this biannual, I believe, survey
That's right.
participants in the early talent development programs. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how long have you been doing that for, and how has that served your participants, if you will?
Yeah, and this will be true. This is kind of the model that most of the stuff that we've built has followed. But we had a member organization say that they were interested in gathering some benchmarking data because they wanted to take a look at their own programs versus what everybody else was doing out there. And so we launched this survey with their cooperation, and it's called the LDP survey. It's essentially as you said, a biennial survey where we're asking, I think it's something like 75 to 80 different questions. And it's all about the management practices of running a structured early talent development program. So everything from what's the structure of your program, What sort of staffing ratios do you have? What are your onboarding practices? What are your retention metrics and NPS scores and your curriculum? Really, all the different questions about how are you running this program and what decisions do you make? And so we've been capturing that data since 2015, every 2 years, and that's allowed us to create a pretty robust data bank of of how people are running structured development programs in this space.
No, that's really useful information that I don't think exists today in any other place, right? It's done in a very siloed manner, perhaps individually at enterprise level or maybe within a certain industry, but I have not come across any other survey specific to like early talent development. So
I
I'm
haven't
aware
either.
of, yeah,
Yeah, I haven't either. And I
yeah.
so we we had last time we ran this, we had 169 different programs that had provided data into it. So it's gotten more and more robust every year, which allows us to slice it and dice it a little bit and to take a look at some pretty broad brush suggestions that the data tell us.
Yeah, and personally, having been in the early talent development space, Dan, I've realized that it is a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science,
Mhm.
right? And there is a huge learning opportunity um, in this space, especially from participants who have done it either in a larger scale and have more data points, right, to learn from them, or just learning from peers in the industry. So I'm super happy, and I'm sure your participants are as well on the type of insights they get from this biennial survey. Um,
It's in just one more thought on that. It's
yeah.
interesting because people always want to know how they compare. That's always a useful thing, right? How does our program compare to what everybody else is doing? But they also, as they get ready to have discussions with their program sponsors, who are often senior level people, they get questions from the senior level people like, well, how are we doing compared to what we should be doing?
Right.
And answering that question of what should we be doing or how should our program be performing is very difficult to answer. At least in a general sense around the world of early talent programs, it's very difficult to answer that question without some outside data. So we're really trying to arm our members with the context that allows them to have conversations with these senior execs and say, here's what the space is doing, and here's what we might consider. And that kind of lends some weight to their recommendations.
Yeah, yeah. So this year's survey, Dan, was it, correct me if I'm wrong, was it the third or fourth survey that you've done so far?
15, 17, 19, 21, 23. So the data that's out there right now is the fifth version of it.
Fifth one. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So what was that one thing that surprised you this time around from the survey, if there was one?
There are actually two things that surprise me. And the first I'll mention is that we found that NPS score. So basically, this is the NPS score, the Net Promoter Score that the participants provide for that program is negatively correlated with the number of full-time employees that directly supervise participants in the program, which is kind of weird. So that you were tempted to kind of make the leap of, well, participants don't like all this supervision,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know? So the more staff members that you have supervising a particular program, the data would suggest that that's negatively impacting NPS scores or participant satisfaction scores. I found that pretty surprising. And we can only speculate as to why that might be there. The other thing that I might mention as a surprise is that since we've been doing correlation analysis, since we've been looking at the inputs and how they've impacted the outputs of programs, there's been a consistent theme, and that consistent theme has been that organization, or I should say programs, that have a strong sense of community tend to perform better on all the evaluation metrics that we collect. And that was still there this year, but less so. It was less compelling.
Hmm.
And we speculate that it might just be that we've been capturing lots of additional data in terms of inputs and outputs, and so we're because there's so many different pieces of this data puzzle, that some of the impact has been watered down because we're seeing, so
Right.
other things that might be affecting our evaluation metrics, but it is a little bit less than I was anticipating. So still a significant impact, but not quite as strong as it has been in the past years.
Got it. And for the interest of the audience, can you share what your sort of definition of a strong sense of community is as far as the program is concerned? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and one that we decided to spend some time trying to figure out. So, after I think the last iteration of this survey, where we saw this very compelling correlation, positive correlation between strength of community and these outcome metrics, the next question, of course, is the one you asked. Well, what does strong community really mean? And so we did an additional correlation analysis, and there are some characteristics that tend to be correlated with organizations that say they have a strong sense of community. So the inputs that we surveyed, organizations whose programs have a higher level of touch, and that means more where a program is customizing an experience for a particular participant as opposed to having a general experience that everybody kind of goes through. It's kind of the difference between a program that might assess a particular participant's competencies and then craft an experience that addresses their particular competencies. That'd be considered high touch. Whereas a program that said, hey, here are the steps that everybody follows and you go through it and there you go, that would be kind of on the low touch side. Well, it's not surprising that programs that rate themselves as higher touch tend to rate higher strength of community. The same is true with the extent to which programs support their alumni. So programs that are engaged in alumni support tend to report stronger senses of community. They're also less apt to allow remote participation on the program. So they're less apt to say, okay, you can do this rotation, remotely, or you can do the whole program remotely. And there were some programs that were doing that a few years ago because of COVID. Some are still doing it, but programs that are more in person have a stronger sense of community. And I thought it was interesting as well that programs that seem to be less focused on evaluating manager satisfaction, so rotation managers or managers that are absorbing graduates after program, the programs that were less focused on making sure they were happy, the managers were happy, tended to have stronger senses of community as well. And that was surprising to me. And then the last couple that I'd mentioned, programs where there was an experience of managing another person. So participants would have, say, a rotation where they had to manage someone or a small staff. Those tended to have stronger sense of community. And then the programs with a stronger sense of community were more likely to measure things like post-program career progression and graduate placeability than other metrics. So kind of a longer looking vision into measuring program success. Those things tended to correlate with stronger community. So again, these are all broad brush things, I mean,
Yeah.
we're always tempted to look at the numbers and derive things that might be a little too firm, but just some interesting general observations and what the data suggests.
Right. Right. Now, coming to DEI, right? DEI has been such a polarizing topic in the last couple of years, I would
Yeah.
say. But there seems to be some amount of a significant correlation between uh, diversity and NPS. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what we found, and I want to make sure I get the numbers right here. Um, so So we found a statistically significant correlation, positive correlation between the percentage of diversity in a program. And I know that the definition of diversity can be different depending on what organization you go to. We don't ask respondents to get down to that level of detail. We say whatever you define diverse as, that's what we want you to use. And we ask them to give us the percent of their program that is comprised of diverse participants. And there's a positive correlation between that percentage and the NPS score of the participants themselves. So that would suggest that perhaps higher diversity percentages are leading to better participant satisfaction. Now, again, the numbers don't tell us why. We can sit and speculate. We can say, well, perhaps Gen Z is very diverse attuned, and and perhaps they're more satisfied when they are surrounded by diverse peers. But that was an interesting finding from this past year.
Yeah, yeah. And for those who may not necessarily understand the NPS, could you quickly define what that means? Yeah.
Yeah, so an NPS score, it stands for Net Promoter Score, and I've got to make sure that I don't want to go on record as completely accurately describing this, but it's a straightforward rating. You rate something 1 through 10, and then you throw out everything that's, I think, 5 or 6 or 7, and then you just create a straight up percentage of your answers in terms of percent of 10. And there, that might not be exactly correct, but it's essentially that you throw out a certain middle portion of the respondents, and then you hang on to the rest of the data to figure out a percentage. And what's really cool overall when we start looking at NPS for early talent programs is that the NPS for program participants that we've surveyed is way higher than what's considered to be excellent for the general employee group as a whole. So I think it's if you do some Google searching out there, you'll find that 50% or a zero point 0.5 is considered to be a very strong employee net promoter score in general when companies survey their employees. And the NPS scores for people in our programs is higher than that. So generally, participants are very pleased with programs, and I think that bodes well for the future of the programs themselves.
What have been your findings around structured programs? And perhaps you can define, I don't know if there is an internal definition or is it again left to the user to define that? Walk us through that, Dan.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a good point to get into, especially for people that may not be familiar with our space. So a lot of organizations hire recent graduates, right? And a lot of organizations will hire them into, okay, here's your job. You're going to be an analyst, or you're going to be an accountant, or whatever it is. You're going to be a developer. And we would call those direct hires. You hire someone in directly into a specific role. There are also out there what we call structured programs, which is really a tailored experience. It has a beginning and an end, where somebody coming into the program will go through certain steps. And those steps could be rotating to different assignments. It could be going through a particular training program. It could be having a mentor or some other structured programming where there's more expressed intent on the part of the organization to build that person into X.
Mhm.
And so a lot of organizations have both. They have direct hires, they have structured program. Um, and and those structured programs can have, really any sort of component you might consider. But that's what we would refer to as a structured program.
And what have been some reported outcomes for programs that have a structured program versus not?
Well, so when we start looking at correlation analysis here again, one of the evaluation metrics that we asked in our survey is something called time to band, which means after somebody leaves the program, how fast do they move to the next salary band in your organization? And what that means is how fast are they getting promoted? And we asked them to provide that number in comparison to some comparator group, maybe people that are at the same level in their career that didn't go through a structured program. And this is supposed to be an indication of the impact on somebody's career trajectory that the program has. Presumably, the program would accelerate somebody, if that's what the program is designed to do. It's accelerating people at a faster rate than they would otherwise without the program. And so we found that organizations that hire a larger percentage of their overall early talent hires into programs as opposed to uh, into direct roles, those organizations tend to report higher acceleration rates.
Mhm.
Now, that's not to say that people in programs move faster in their career than people who are not in programs. That might be true, but that's not what our number says. Our number just says that organizations that hire their total pool of early talent into structured programs tend to report faster career acceleration than organizations that hire a smaller portion of their early talent into structured programs.
I see.
So it's kind of complex, but that's the precise way to describe it.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Also, can you talk about the negative correlation that we saw between the program length and the completion rate? Seems kind of obvious, but yeah, talk to us about it.
Sure. Yeah. So the worst thing in the world, maybe not the worst thing in the world, but one of the top concerns of people in our community is what if we invest all this time and money into developing people and then they leave? So we end up training great people for our competitors. So people are always very focused on retention. And across the board, retention's been pretty challenging, particularly with young professionals. There's this view that they're impatient and they have a short attention span and all these things. So our community has been trying to find ways to address that retention issue. And one sort of quick way to address it is we say, well, maybe the programs are just too long. And so we've seen a lot of program or a lot of people in the community shorten their programs to try and nip that in the bud a little bit. And so the finding that we have shows that yes, in fact, the length of program is negatively correlated to retention, meaning that the longer the program you have, the worse your retention is going to be. And that was one of, if not the strongest correlation that we found in the entire analysis. So just to validate what might be intuitive for most people, there is a negative correlation between length of program and
Yeah.
retention.
Yeah. And I know this information just anecdotally, having spoken to numerous, professionals, both from the sponsor side as well as the programmatic side, that, programs that are like 2 years or 3 years long, rotational programs, it's very hard to sort of match your business forecast with the graduating class, really. It's as simple as that, right? Like, can you really truly forecast 2, 3 years ahead of time to match your business needs with the pipeline of talent that's coming through some of those programs? And those have been extremely challenging, is what I've heard. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's one of the fundamental challenges of running a program is it is by nature a strategic solution, right? It's looking to deliver results primarily in the future. And so you've got to be able to pin your business executives down to saying, if I build you X, will you be able to absorb X?
Right.
And the pace that business changes these days, it's sometimes challenging to pin them down for that. But that's a fundamental concern for people in our program. Always just keep aligned, right, with the business and where it's
Right.
going.
Right. And our program here at Quintrix is typically about 12 weeks. And
Hmm.
so our lead time between recruitment and deployment is about 18 weeks. And even that becomes challenging. Like a lot of businesses, like, I don't know what, what my needs are going to look like in
Yeah,
4 or 5 months from now. I need talent now. But again, right? Not all sponsors are perfect sponsors for this program. Like you said, this is more of a strategic initiative of bringing in that, next generation of talent. So you do need a level of commitment. You do need a level of sort of um, planning and forecasting to make sure these programs are successful. Um, Dan, it was lovely to have you today. Thank you for
my
spending a
pleasure.
few minutes with me, and I'm sure our listeners certainly find all that information insightful. Can you quickly tell them if they wanted to get more information about your organization or this report, what would be the best place to find that?
Sure. So the organization again is called LDP Connect. You go to ldpconnect.com and you'll see all the different things that we do. The white paper that what we've been discussing is based on, the white paper is free out there. So if you go to our website and just click a button, we'll send it to you. It's a pretty um, it's a pretty in-depth read. So there's a lot of I think interesting things to find in there, but we're happy to send it to you. And there's lots of free stuff that people can do with us too, just getting on calls and getting part of the community. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, Krishna, and I hope people have found this information valuable. It's always a moving target, right? Always.
It is, and
Going.
thank you for building this community. And I'm sure me and many of us in this space are grateful that we even have this rather niche and strongly knit community, I would say. So thanks for sort of helping build that over the last several years. So we
It's been my
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
It's been a thorough pleasure.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Yeah.